He erased me.
Standing in the back of that polished marble conference room with champagne that tasted like battery acid, I watched my wife Elena laugh at something her boss Brandon said. The same jokes she'd mocked at home for years. But here, with investors watching and cameras rolling, she touched his arm and smiled like he was the most brilliant person she'd ever met. One of the money guys gestured toward me and asked Brandon who I was. Brandon flashed this toothpaste commercial grin and announced I was Elena's husband, that I just tagged along to these events sometimes, probably bored out of my mind. He wasn't joking around. He was dismissing me in front of 20 people who controlled tens of millions of dollars. Elena didn't correct him, didn't even glance my direction. She never looked at me during these corporate showcases anymore. I walked out, stepped past the expensive hors d'oeuvres tray, past the photo booth, past the branded wall where everyone lined up for selfies like cattle waiting for slaughter. Nobody stopped me. Nobody noticed a thing. That's what being invisible gets you in rooms full of people obsessed with being seen. They don't realize you're gone until something breaks. Outside at the valet stand, I pulled out my phone and opened a text thread with my attorney, Marcus. Typed 5 words. Send it at 3:59 p.m. Hit send. That was the entire message. That's all I needed to do. Brandon followed me outside, probably to gloat or make some hollow gesture of concern. He adjusted his collar like he was posing for a cologne advertisement and asked if I was good, if I had anything to say about this massive day for my wife. I looked at him for a long moment, studied his fake tan and capped teeth, that little furrow in his brow that showed he wasn't nearly as relaxed as he wanted everyone to believe. That detail mattered. I took one step closer, just enough to lower my voice so only he could hear. Your phone will ring at 4 o'clock. You'll understand everything then. I turned and walked away. No anger, no raised voice, no theatrics. Just a man with a clock ticking behind his eyes. Here's what they didn't understand. 14 years ago, I built something in my basement called Lighthouse Protocol. Started with a secondhand server rack I bought off Craigslist and a whiteboard covered in scribbles that only made sense to me back when code felt pure and ambition didn't taste like ash. It was an algorithmic optimizer with proprietary back-end pathways, specifically designed to automate decision-making for logistics firms. Nobody cared about it initially, until it actually worked, and worked better than anything else on the market. A small company in Arizona bought access to use it. Then another firm in Vancouver reached out. Not full ownership rights, just non-exclusive runtime licenses, with one absolutely critical detail buried in Clause 7. Non-transferability provisions, and a termination eliminate switch baked directly into the legal language. Every single byte of code was tagged with identifiers. Every function call was traceable back to the source. The legal shell entity that owned Lighthouse Protocol was a Delaware LLC with a registered agent address shared by 87 other ghost corporations. Mine was number 88 on that list. No breadcrumbs left behind, no LinkedIn profile, no GitHub ego trail showing off my work. Nothing. Then I walked away from active development and tucked everything into cold storage. Let the licensing revenue quietly pay for our second house, Elena's boutique marketing agency dreams, our daughter's college tuition fund. Lighthouse Protocol just sat there in the dark, gathering dust and generating steady returns, while I moved on to other projects and other work. It was invisible money funding a visible life. Then last month I saw the promotional demo reel. Elena's company, Cinevox, was bragging about launching a revolutionary new decision architecture platform called Neural Path. Same exact user interface structure as my code. Same logic tree configurations. Same decision pathways. Hell, even the debug strings displayed in the bottom corner matched what I'd personally written 14 years ago. They hadn't even stripped out the original function names from the back end, just wrapped my entire system in flashy JavaScript animations and gradients and declared it revolutionary innovation. Elena was featured prominently in the promo video, smiling confidently, gesturing enthusiastically at flowcharts she didn't build. explaining complex logic branches she never wrote or understood. Saying things like, with NeuralPath, we're optimizing decisions in real time using our completely proprietary platform. And we built this entirely in-house and we're incredibly proud. I paused the video right there and zoomed in on the interface. Right there in the core module display, plain as day, LPO9, Lighthouse Protocol, Module 09. They hadn't even bothered renaming the foundational architecture. I checked the internal hiring logs that were semi-public. Elena joined Cinevox exactly 6 months earlier, just weeks before this whole rebrand initiative started gaining momentum. Her email address appeared repeatedly on the commit logs under the deployment branch. Sloppy, amateurish work, leaving digital fingerprints everywhere. Clause 7 of the licensing agreement I'd written was absolutely crystal clear about this exact scenario. Any licensee or affiliated party contributing to or commercially deploying derivative builds of Lighthouse Protocol modules without explicit written authorization from the licensor would immediately trigger full termination of all usage rights, plus legal damages as comprehensively defined in subsection C. And subsection C was beautifully specific. It mandated immediate suspension of all commercial activity using the technology. No grace period, no opportunity to negotiate, no second chances, just instant passing. I didn't yell when I discovered all this. Didn't rage or throw things. I called Marcus, the lawyer who'd helped me draft that ironclad contract all the way back in 2011. The man's got the patience of a Buddhist monk and the precision of a surgical chainsaw. I asked him if this situation was as enforceable as I thought it was. He whistled low and long. They really rebranded your entire engine and didn't even bother masking the variable tags? I confirmed every detail. He actually chuckled. I hope you've got a watch handy because at 3:59, I'm sending them something they absolutely won't forget. Interceptions. The thing about building systems quietly for years is that people forget you're just as capable of burning things down. They looked at me and saw some bored husband standing silently in the back of a corporate ballroom holding champagne. They completely forgot I was the architect who designed the foundation. They genuinely thought the house belonged to them now. They didn't see the structural supports trembling. Not yet, but they absolutely would. I made certain of it. And Elena, she should have known so much better. She literally watched me write significant portions of that original code. She proofread the licensing agreement documents for grammatical errors. She made jokes about Clause 7 over dinner once, saying, nobody ever actually reads that deep into legal contracts, that I could probably hide a homicide confession in there and nobody would notice. She read it thoroughly and still walked directly into the trap. At 3:57 p.m., Marcus sent me a text. Final version ready. Any last words before I send? I replied with 2 words. Just send. At 3:59 p.m. precisely, on the exact minute, a single email departed from his law firm's server. Not dramatic or explosive or loud, just quiet and surgical, like the first click of a detonator before the blast. Subject line in plain black font with no formatting. Violation of IP License Clause 7. Immediate suspension of rights. No exclamation marks. No theatrical language. No bluffing. Just the legal equivalent of a quiet knife slipped efficiently between ribs. The recipient list was strategically chosen. CEO of Cinevox Technologies. Carbon copied to their entire legal team. Their head of compliance. 2 outside counsel groups directly tied to their upcoming investor fundraising round. Attached to the email was a meticulously prepared 9-page PDF document. Page 1 contained a formal statement of breach, specifically citing every single offending module by its technical name. Page 2 had high-resolution screenshots of repository logs, clearly showing user account handles tied to rebranded code. Page 3 displayed a highlighted copy of Clause 7 in bright yellow. Pages 4 through 7 contained detailed timestamps, proving continuous unauthorized usage. Page 8 included a certified copy of the original licensing agreement. properly notarized and timestamped from November 2011. Page 9 showed my signature, clear and undeniable. They hadn't bothered researching Lighthouse Protocol's actual origin because they made assumptions. Assumed it was dead legacy technology. Assumed the LLC that originally licensed it was defunct after all these years. Assumed I was defanged, retired from tech, quiet and harmless, completely irrelevant to their plans. They missed one absolutely critical line buried in the contract language. The intellectual property described and attached herein remains under sole ownership of the original licensor in perpetuity, and its derivatives may not be rebranded, redeployed, or redistributed commercially under any naming convention whatsoever without prior, explicit written consent. Selfish was right in the middle of his main presentation when the email hit his inbox. His phone buzzed once in his jacket pocket. He probably dismissed it mentally with a confident smile, thinking it was just another congratulatory message. Another polished slide flicked onto the massive screen behind him, this one prominently boasting a 75% time efficiency improvement gained through NeuralPath's supposedly exclusive proprietary engine. He was visibly proud of those impressive numbers. The screen behind him displayed colorful user feedback bubbles and pilot project statistics. Everyone in the audience was nodding along enthusiastically. One particularly excited investor actually stood up and clapped. At exactly 4 o'clock, the CEO's executive assistant forwarded the critical email with a priority flag. Brandon glanced at the notification, tapped it open, scrolled down once through the content. Then his entire face went completely blank. Not confused, not angry or defensive, just utterly empty. The kind of profound stillness that overtakes someone when they suddenly realize their pants are actively on fire in front of a room absolutely packed with cameras and witnesses. He walked out of the room without finishing his sentence, leaving the presentation hanging awkwardly in midair. That's when his phone actually rang. I'd been sitting in the small cafe directly across the street with a cup of black coffee that had gone completely cold, watching the building through the plate glass windows. The sky outside had turned slate gray. Heavy clouds hung low and tight. His phone rang loud enough that I could see him fumble for it. I watched him answer the call. The conversation lasted under 30 seconds total. Not because it was genuinely brief, but because he completely stopped speaking and just listened in growing horror. Listened to Marcus calmly and methodically, walking him through exactly what had just happened, what it legally meant, and what consequences were coming next. When Brandon finally hung up, he didn't move even slightly. Didn't even lower the phone from his ear right away. Just stood frozen in the hallway outside the boardroom, blinking repeatedly like a man who just realized the solid road beneath him had never actually been concrete at all. It was just ice the entire time. And now massive cracks were spreading in every direction. Then, slowly, almost in slow motion, he turned his head down the corridor, past the glass doors, toward her. Elena was still smiling brightly, still laughing at something one of the lead developers had said. Then she noticed him staring intensely at her. She tilted her head with curiosity, confused by his expression. He didn't nod, didn't wave or gesture, just kept staring with hollow eyes. And that's exactly when her confident smile started to falter and crack. I finished what was left of my cold coffee, abandoned the half-full mug on the table, and walked out through the cafe's side entrance. I'd done exactly what needed to be done. No explosions, no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation. Just paperwork, code, legal documentation, and perfect timing. Sometimes the sharpest revenge doesn't make any sound at all. It just arrives precisely on schedule. Less than an hour later, Elena got summoned to an emergency meeting. Brandon's assistant found her and whispered something urgent in her ear. Whatever those words were, they visibly drained the color from her face like someone had pulled a plug. She stiffened noticeably, blinked twice, then excused herself from the investor she'd been charming. Her heels clicked too loudly against the polished floor as she followed the assistant down the hallway, past smiling interns, past the catering cart, past promotional posters printed with her own inspiring quotes. The door at the end of the corridor wasn't one she usually entered. This was where actual decisions got made, where real money talked and marketing slogans went to die. She paused before entering, adjusted her hair like she still maintained control over something. The room was silent when she walked in. Not tense, just silent. 4 people sat around the polished conference table. Legal counsel from corporate headquarters, the head of compliance, 2 senior partners from the lead investment firm that was days away from finalizing their funding round. Brandon stood near the projection screen, looking pale and stiff, no longer the charming performer with the perfect smile and easy confidence. The projector was still on. Neuralpath's logo hovered there, large and suddenly ridiculous, as if the brand itself was trying to backpedal from existence. Elena smiled out of pure habit. "Hey, what's going on? Is everything okay?" Nobody smiled back at her. Nobody offered reassurance. Brandon gestured toward the screen with a tired hand. "Do you know your husband owns the base code for Neuralpath?" She blinked once, then twice. "No, he doesn't own it. He sold his company years ago. All the licensing was handled properly back then." The lawyer leaned forward slowly, with the calm demeanor of an executioner preparing the blade. "He sold access rights, not ownership. And you, as his legal spouse, should have disclosed the obvious conflict of interest when we began developing what we now conclusively know is a derivative product. The moment you joined this company and contributed to that project, the license became legally void under Clause 7 of the original agreement." Display compliance interrupted, scrolling deliberately on a tablet. "The repository logs show your credentials and activity during the early integration phase. You didn't just know about the code's origin. You worked on it directly and extensively. You renamed multiple modules. You commented out original developer notes. You left digital traces everywhere in the system." Elena went completely quiet. Brandon stepped forward, rubbing his temple hard like he'd aged an entire decade in just 5 minutes. "He told me my phone would ring at 4 o'clock. That's literally all he said to me outside. And then it did. Right on time." Miss Yushi opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, because anything she said now would only confirm what was already proven with documentation. The corporate lawyer tapped the table sharply. "All product rollout is frozen, effective immediately." The compliance officer followed up without missing a single knock. "You are suspended from all duties pending full internal review." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical, clinical. She didn't scream or argue, didn't try to defend herself, but something visible behind her eyes twisted into barely controlled panic. She reached for her phone like it might somehow offer salvation. Brandon just shook his head slowly. "No more damage control. Not this time." She looked desperately around the table, searching for some trace of mercy or understanding or sympathy. There was absolutely none. The investment partners stared at her like she was a miscalculation in an important spreadsheet. A red flag. A liability. Disposable. "Do I get to respond to these accusations?" she asked quietly. Legal counsel slid a thick folder across the polished wooden table. "You already did. Extensively." Inside were printed screenshots, Slack message conversations, Git commit histories. Her name clearly visible beside damning messages like "stripping legacy vendor tags" and "override Lighthouse Protocol ID header permanently." Every single word was another nail hammered into the coffin. She stood slowly, unsteadily. Nobody moved to stop her or help her. Nobody thanked her for her time or contributions. Outside the conference room, she leaned heavily against the wall and stared down the long corridor, like maybe she could somehow walk backward to 5 minutes ago and choose different words, different decisions, different actions. But that hallway only went forward into an uncertain future. And ahead of her was nothing but professional fallout and personal destruction. She didn't show up to work the next morning. Nobody expected her to appear. But the legal review team definitely showed up, and they came thoroughly prepared and hungry for evidence. Everything she'd ever written on company Slack, every shared document comment, every internal message exchanged with the development team. Everything was systematically scraped, printed, and time-stamped with precision. They weren't looking for simple negligence. They were performing a complete autopsy on a career that had just died violently in the boardroom. By noon, Brandon had a stack of transcript documents thick enough to require heavy-duty staples. He didn't read through them himself, Just pushed the entire pile forward to the investor council with a flat, exhausted expression. You'll want to start reading on page 12. Page 12 is where her tone shifted noticeably from professional to arrogant. 3 months ago. Let's scrub all the vendor tags. Lighthouse Protocol is ancient legacy tech. Nobody will trace it if we refactor the module names properly. 2 months ago. We'll repackage the entire optimizer as a completely new pipeline. If anyone asks questions, it's built on in-house logic. 1 month ago. Don't worry about the old license. I know the guy who originally wrote it. Trust me, he absolutely won't make noise. That last message was sent just 3 weeks before she looked me directly in the eye at dinner and said I should definitely come to the launch event, that I'd be proud of what she'd accomplished. But the real damage wasn't the technical violations or the legal breaches. It was the personal cruelty nobody expected to find buried in casual conversations. One message from a late-night Slack thread, joking casually with a lead developer. Honestly, I'm tired of dragging dead weight around. Once this product launches successfully, I'm completely done with the quiet genius phase of my life. Dead weight. That's what I was to her. Not the man who funded her agency's first office space. Not the one who taught her SQL basics in our tiny apartment kitchen when she failed her computer science elective. Not the one who set up her first GitHub repository, under my own paid account because she didn't want to deal with another login credential. Just dead weight, holding her back. When that specific line appeared on the screen during the boardroom review, nobody spoke. Every partner, every legal mind, every investor who'd previously considered her the brilliant face of innovation had the same realizations simultaneously. She wasn't just careless or sloppy. She was profoundly arrogant. Arrogant enough to gamble her marriage, her code base, and her entire professional reputation on the assumption that I was too quiet to ever matter. She forgot what silence can actually mean. It doesn't always come from submission or weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of someone carefully holding their breath before pulling the trigger. The compliance officer highlighted one final message and deliberately left it displayed on the screen during the extended internal review. I'm not worried about him. He's not confrontational. He just builds stuff quietly and then disappears. They all stared at that sentence for a very long time, until one of the senior investors finally said what absolutely everyone was thinking. She knew. She just didn't care. Brandon didn't disagree with that assessment. He just stood up slowly, walked to the window overlooking the city, and sighed deeply. The license is completely void, the rollout's dead, and we have a critical shareholder call starting in 20 minutes. Nobody spoke her name again that entire day. Her electronic badge access was disabled within the hour. Her profile photograph vanished from the company website. Her email address got rerouted to human resources. That same afternoon, her name was systematically replaced in every internal document with the neutral phrase, former contributor. Not partner, not lead architect, not even employee, just former. The code still existed in the repository, but her professional future didn't. She pulled into our driveway too fast that evening. Tires kicked gravel violently sideways. Motion sensor lights blinked awake, flooding the front of the house in cold, clinical white. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. She hadn't eaten anything all day. Her makeup had streaked under her eyes. One earring was missing. She had no idea when she'd lost it. At first, she genuinely thought she'd arrived at the wrong house. The porch light was on like usual, but her key didn't fit the lock. She twisted it hard, tried again, cursed under her breath, jiggled it desperately like the mechanism was malfunctioning. Then she noticed the envelope taped directly to the door. No name written, just taped dead center like a target. She peeled it off with trembling fingers. It was thick, heavier than it should have been, and sealed like something expensive and official. Inside was one page on heavy paper. No emotion, no explanation. Transfer of ownership notification. Effective immediately. The primary residence located at the address listed has been reassigned to the Oakmont Irrevocable Trust. The 2020 BMW X5, license plate redacted, reassigned to same trust. Joint bank accounts ending in 8921, 5540, and 0037 transferred to trust management. Power of attorney removed. Authorized access revoked. At the very bottom, centered in 12-point font, your exit has been processed. Discharged at that final line until the words stopped making coherent sense. Read it again slowly. Read it aloud to herself. Your exit has been processed. She tried the door key again, more violently this time, forcing it. Still nothing. She rang the doorbell frantically, like it was an emergency, half expecting me to answer, half praying I would, just so she could scream at me, demand answers, demand something to make sense. The door stayed locked. Deadbolt engaged. She stepped back and looked up at the house. Really looked at it for the first time. Windows were dark. Curtains drawn tight. The place looked sealed, like nobody actually lived there anymore. And then, the realization hit her hard. It was never hers. She'd treated it like hers. Decorated rooms, repainted the den without asking permission, threw elaborate networking parties that made the neighbors file complaints. But every title, every deed, every single scrap of legal ownership had been under one name. Mine. She'd just been listed as emergency contact. Not owner, not co-trustee, just contact information. The Oakmont Trust had been quietly created 4 years ago, back when she first started talking like a startup influencer and coming home with phrases like personal brand and exit strategy. I'd made a strategic decision back then. Quietly, legally, without any warning. Moved everything valuable into the trust with only one controlling party. Me. She never read the paperwork I sent her. Never thought she had to. Because I wasn't the kind of man who made aggressive moves like this. Until I was. The panic came slowly at first. Started in her fingertips, then crept up her arms, down her spine. She stumbled back to the car, yanked open the glove box frantically, started searching for something, anything with her name still on it. Old mail, registration papers, proof she existed in this place. She found a valet stub from a hotel event 6 months ago. That was literally it. Nothing else carried her name anymore. She tried calling her bank. Passcode failed. Tried again. Security flag triggered. Account completely locked. She called her sister. No answer. She called me. Straight to voicemail. She left a message, voice breaking apart. Please, just tell me what's happening. Please, I'll fix everything, I swear. Just tell me what I need to do. But there was nothing left to fix, because nothing she'd built or touched was ever actually hers. Not the launch, not the code, not the name on the deed, and definitely not the man she'd called dead weight. The first full day of exile, she called everyone who'd ever laughed at her jokes in the break room. The first 3 voicemails were polite, curious, controlled. She even tried to laugh it off. Crazy day yesterday, right? Looks like legal totally blew this way out of proportion. Call me back when you can. By the 5th call, her tone was cracking audibly. The 6th was just silence, followed by one shaky breath before she hung up. She opened her laptop at a local cafe, the same place she used to hold casual power meetings over oat milk lattes, and words like synergy loop and disruption. The Wi-Fi auto-connected immediately. Her login still worked, but her access to company Slack was terminated. Internal documents were archived and restricted. Email completely deactivated. She opened the investor group chat on Signal. 12 names with inflated bios like Vision Capital Partner and Serial FinTech Founder and Brand Futurist. She typed carefully. Hey, let's clear the air. Brandon overreacted. We can still build from this. Ping me directly. The message sat beneath 2 blue check marks. Nobody responded at all. 10 minutes later, she noticed the group name had changed. It no longer included her name. She scrolled through her personal contacts, picked the safest option. Her best friend from graduate school, the one who cried at our wedding and helped her rehearse her TEDx pitch. No answer. She checked Instagram. The friend had unfollowed her. LinkedIn. Connection removed. She didn't try calling again. She dug through old emails desperately, found one from me dated 2018. Subject line, for future clarity, no action needed. She'd never bothered opening it. She clicked it now, 4 years too late. It was the founding paperwork for the Oakmont Trust. My name listed under settler and trustee. Her name, nowhere on any document. She remembered rolling her eyes at the time. More of your paranoia, she'd muttered dismissively over coffee. Now she wasn't sure if she wanted to scream or laugh hysterically. 2 weeks after everything imploded, she stood outside the Cinevox building, pressing her badge repeatedly against the security scanner. Nothing happened. She tried again, waving it. Tried the backup keycard she'd never officially turned in. Still nothing. Inside, the front desk security guard Kyle looked up from his monitor. He didn't buzz her in. He picked up a phone instead. She tried to mouth something through the glass, held up her card, tapped her chest. Kyle turned slightly in his chair, nodded at someone she couldn't see, looked away. 2 long minutes later, Brandon walked out of the elevator. He looked terrible. Tie loose, collar wilted, face drawn tighter than she'd ever seen it. He didn't hurry, didn't wave, just walked slowly up to the door and stood behind the glass barrier. She tried to speak. "I need to talk to you." He didn't respond. She tried again. "You know this went too far. This wasn't all my fault." Shimmer bin. Nothing. Finally, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a temporary visitor badge, held it up. Not to give it to her, but to show her what it meant. It had a red stripe across the top. Escorted access only. He mouthed one sentence slowly, deliberately, making sure she understood each word. "You played the wrong man." She shook her head, disbelief fogging every thought. "Brandon, come on. I didn't know he'd actually do this. I didn't think..." Heighten, he cut her off with a raised hand. This time he spoke aloud. His voice wasn't angry or bitter. It was finished. "You can't fix this." She felt her throat tighten painfully. "Please, just give me one chance to explain. I can make this right." He shook his head slowly. "You can't. You thought you understood power. You only understood attention." She took a step back, tried to compose herself, failed completely. "You don't get it. I built that rollout. I made the connections. You needed me." "You had everything," he said quietly. "And you lost it the second you thought the guy standing behind you wouldn't see the knife in your hand." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The tears hit before she felt them coming. She pressed one hand desperately against the glass. He didn't flinch, didn't offer comfort, just turned and walked away without another word. Her hand slid down the cold surface until it hit the metal frame. She stayed there for a minute, then another. People passed behind the glass, but nobody looked at her. Nobody opened the door. Nobody paused. This was the moment she realized it was over. Not just the job or the launch or the title. Her access was gone. Not just to the building, to everything. 14 days after everything died, she was sitting in a cafe across from the Cinevox building. Cheap coffee, 1 bar of Wi-Fi, no makeup. Just an old hoodie and exhaustion so deep it had settled permanently into her bones. Then she saw me through the foggy window, standing outside the building's main entrance. Not pacing, not anxious, just there. Dark coat, collar turned up, hands in my pockets like I had all the time in the world. She hadn't seen me since the envelope on the door, since her calls went unanswered, since she cried in a hallway to a man who once introduced her at conferences with genuine pride. Her stomach turned cold. She didn't move, didn't blink. Brandon stepped out of the building, adjusting his blazer, looking at a tablet mid-conversation with someone behind him. He stopped short when he saw me standing there. We didn't shake hands, didn't smile, just stood there facing each other. 2 men, 2 stories, 1 finish line. Then Brandon's phone rang. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to the glass, heart pounding like it was trying to warn her. He answered, said nothing, just listened. 10 seconds total. His posture changed slowly, like someone removed the structure from his spine. The confidence drained. His grip on the tablet loosened. His jaw set. Not in anger, but recognition. And then he looked up. Not at me, but across the street. Right at her. Like he knew she was there. What she saw in his eyes wasn't betrayal. It was fear. I followed his gaze, met her eyes through the window. My expression was calm, detached, empty. And then, in the smallest gesture imaginable, I nodded once. Not a greeting, not forgiveness, just confirmation that it was done, that every move had landed, that she had been seen, measured, and ended. I turned and walked away. No gloating, no final words, just boots on concrete, disappearing into morning fog. Brandon didn't move for a full minute. Then he slowly sat down on the building steps, tablet in his lap, hands shaking slightly, as if some realization had bloomed in him too late to change anything. And Elena sat in that cafe, coffee untouched, staring through the glass. Nobody looked at her. Nobody noticed her shaking hands. The world she'd ruled, networked, climbed through ambition and charm, no longer remembered her name. Not because she failed spectacularly, because I erased her without ever raising my voice. Just one clause, one phone call, one perfectly timed email. Total, final, surgical silence.